So hello and welcome in. I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. I do the Lansing Lugnuts play-by-play, Class Single A for the Toronto Blue Jays. I also do Central Michigan University women's basketball. And I come from Prince George's County, Maryland, where I was part of desegregated court-ordered busing from my entirely white hometown to entirely black neighborhoods, or at the very least, majority area. This is a topic which is central to me in terms of that, which is also central, which I not so subtly showed. I've written a book on the baseball thesaurus and a book on the football thesaurus. So I am fascinated by the language that we use to talk sports. And so let's introduce broadcasters to talk sports and talk sports in a very specific, albeit wide-ranging area. Chris Lewis.
All right, appreciate the intro there. Chris Lewis is my name. I'm from South Jersey, right outside of Philly, so I basically consider myself a Philadelphia kid, even though, again, I'm not from Pennsylvania, so people try to get on me for that. But I went to Syracuse after doing the high school thing in South Jersey, and I was one of those people who was like, oh, all these other successful broadcasters went to Syracuse? Okay, I have to go there too. Yeah, not very creative, but hey, that was a path that I wanted to do. But it turned out great. Loved it there. Loved the competitiveness. Loved the experience I got, although it wasn't technically in the broadcast school at Syracuse. I was in a business school, but it still worked out to the point where right after college, I got a job in Idaho Falls doing minor league baseball out there for the Idaho Falls Chuckers, the Kansas City Royals affiliate, which was a great couple of summers there. After the first summer of doing minor league baseball there, the women's basketball job at Boise State opened. Thankfully, that Idaho Falls to Boise drive is only about 4 hours, so you can interview there in person and get to be in front of people, which I've learned matters a lot. So ended up getting that Boise State job, doing women's basketball and a couple of Olympic sports. Went back to Idaho Falls the next summer. After that summer, a radio show job opened in Boise, Idaho. So I ended up, since they were familiar with me, it was on the same station that the games were on. I ended up getting that job doing a daily 2-hour afternoon sports talk show, which allowed me to stay in Boise year round and take more Boise State opportunities with doing some more Olympic sports and freelance stuff. With COVID, everything's kind of crazy now. So what jobs I actually have right now is still to be determined, I guess. I hope that it all works out for the best. I know the radio show right now is not a thing. In fall sports, who knows what's going to happen, but I guess you can just stay optimistic.
Thank you, Chris. Megan.
I'm Meghan McPeak. I am originally from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. For those that aren't familiar with that, it is about 40 minutes west of Toronto. Notice I did not pronounce the second T in Toronto. I just have to say before I finish introducing myself, I love the fact that Emma, your dog, is just floating in the background. I'm a huge dog person. I am currently the play-by-play voice for the Washington Mystics of the WNBA, as well as the Capital City Go-Go, which is the G League affiliate of the Washington Wizards. I grew up playing basketball, and this is my way to stay in the game as no longer being a player. And I think with everything going on, that this is a conversation that needs to be had, because wording and phrasing does not just matter in your day-to-day life. It also matters in how we cover sports and things that we say. And in recent times, we've seen that gets people into some hot water. So I am looking forward to this conversation.
Darius.
Hello, I'm Darius Thigpen from Tampa, Florida. I went to Ohio State. I thought I was going to be an athlete when I was 5-6 years old. 6'1", but never fruition. So being a sports broadcaster then became the love, a way I could get back into sports and stay in sports. Wanted to be Stuart Scott, wanted to be Gus Johnson, and kind of worked my way through. At Ohio State, worked in minor league baseball with the Columbus Clippers, AAA for Cleveland Indians, also for Lehigh Valley, AAA for the Phillies, and bounced around a couple of spots before I got to Longwood University. I was play-by-play there for 3 years before I decided to leave sports broadcasting and go into marketing. So stepped away from journalism into the dark side and the PR side.
Emma.
Hello, everybody. I'm Emma Tiedemann, and this is Davy Crockett that has decided to pace all of a sudden. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and played basketball all growing up, and then my knees went bad in high school, and I kind of picked up broadcasting when I was 15. I went to the University of Missouri, so we won't address the Syracuse, Missouri issue in the room. But after Mizzou, I spent time with an independent team, the St. Paul Saints. I spent the last 2 seasons as the voice of the Lexington Legends and Morehead State women's basketball team. And just actually in March, moved up to Portland, Maine, where I am currently, and the eventual voice of the Portland Sea Dogs, the AA affiliate of the Boston Red Sox.
Thank you, everyone. Our topic is this. Megan, very close to where you are, albeit in Maryland, the Washington football team have changed their name. Up in Canada, Edmonton, CFL, Edmonton is changing its name. Cleveland and Major League Baseball is looking at changing its name. These are very big, obvious ways in terms of these names are racist. These names are offensive, and they've been this way for a long time. There's so much smaller. There's so many, whether it's subtle, whether it's implicit, and that's what we're going to get into. So what was the first thing that came to any of your minds when I said something implicit, whether it's racism, sexism, that needs to be examined within sports broadcasting?
I guess I can lead off, and I just think that it was, one of the many tentacles off of the COVID layer was that we had that basically 2 or 3 month span where racial injustice and awareness of some of the inequities in this world. It's crazy how, with everybody basically having to be in place, how that got to be front and center. And then you mentioned how the Washington football team had to get rid of the name that they've had for a long time. At the same time that happened, there was a news story that may be significantly more important than the name change itself, was the fact that within that organization, there seemed to be a culture of mistreatment towards women. So there it just goes to highlight, whenever you have one main topic or one area of discussion, it seems to breed something else that is of equal, if not more importance. So to sort of prioritize all of these discussion points becomes its own little game here.
Yeah, specifically as it goes to Washington, it's been a really tricky one because I think that the name itself, we can all agree that it's a racial slur. The Washington racial slur, I mean, that's a very easy one to be able to point out. But then when it gets into breaking the tradition from other sports, from other teams, because there's conversations around the Atlanta Braves, there's conversations around Cleveland Indians, is it a caricature or is it something that is actually an uplifting or something that you're trying to promote a positive view of? So here in Florida, we have the Florida State Seminoles. So the Seminoles are a team that has gone back and forth where people say, well, no, that's not offensive, or, oh, yeah, that is offensive. But the conversation is always from the standpoint of, well, hold up, we are showing love to the Seminole Nation, a specific group of people. We're not just throwing up a funny character. And I think that's where we kind of have to start with a lot of the conversations, especially as we're looking at the teams, their names, and the logos. And when you look at the Cleveland Indians, even though that's a team that's been the same name for what's been 70, 80 years now, that's a clear caricature. So that's not uplifting anyone. That's not going and celebrating anyone. So I think that's kind of at the center of this conversation, just kind of using a little common sense, even though we get so used to just being in the middle of sports, and just for our love of sports, we can kind of have a blind spot to many of these things when it comes to how it affects people of different races, of course, how it affects women, of course, how it affects the LGBTQ community as well. There are so many blind spots that people can have just because they just want to get back to sports at the end of the day. So it's kind of understandable how you can get to it, but I think that's at least the starting point of the conversation, using a little common sense.
Getting back to sports for some people is not getting back to sports for others.
Right.
So being from the DC area, Washington football team is my team. And so the football stadium is right down the road from my middle school. We sang the fight song every day in elementary school music class. Mrs. Harris would lead all of us singing the song. My family would sing the song constantly. And the whole idea of, the team owner was the last to integrate the NFL. His wedding was extraordinarily racist. They come from Boston, and here's the history. Like Cleveland, the history of the team name They were the Cleveland Naps because that was their best player. And then they started bouncing around from name to name. And then from what I read, they only chose the Indians because the Boston Braves had just won the World Series, so they wanted to ride their coattails. Indians was the cool, fad nickname. So yeah, for all those people like, let's get back to sports, there is no really getting back to sports.
Yeah, I think, to Darius's point, it comes down to, the whole conversation of uplifting, caricature, racial slur. And it's funny because I actually had this conversation with a friend of mine, and the Seminoles came up. And it's tradition at home games that you guys have the live mascot that rides out on the horse and then throws the spike into the field. There could be some Native Indians that find that offensive because it is someone dressed up in garb. It is someone wearing a costume, similar to, when Black people have an issue with people doing blackface. That's racist. Some Native Indians and some Seminoles may find the mascot being racist. And I know it's been a back and forth conversation with FSU and fans and people in that area for many, many years. And then, you look at the Washington football team, and the one person I recall doing this, huge shout out to Bomani Jones, he has been actually calling them the Washington football team for a number of years. He has refused to call them what they were called, knowing that it is a racial slur, being a Black man. So I give him a lot of credit for, being one of the first to even call them that. And he's been calling them that for years, as I said. And then, with myself in a league that is consistently shot down, consistently picked apart, and it's simply because it's women playing a game. It is, I'm engulfed in it. I was a female athlete, so it's not just the fact I work in female sports as well in the WNBA. I was a female athlete, so when I see those comments, it hits home for me as a former athlete, but also too, I cover these women. And, with the news coming out today with Kyrie Irving and the fund that he's starting to support all the players for whatever reason that they've decided to opt out of the 2020 season, with it being down at IMG Academy in Bradenton, that is a true testament to someone not just talking the talk, but now actually putting their words into action and doing what he said he was going to do as an ally and as a supporter. And there is no real way to just stick to sports, as you said, Jesse. Like, when you have someone who, I can't even call him the P word, because let's be real, he has not done what that person in that place is supposed to do, what in leading a country. I call him the WHO, which stands for the White House occupant. And when you look at the fact that he interjects himself into sports, you cannot then ask athletes to stick to sports. If he can't do it, why should they? Because they're primarily Black and they don't have the intelligence to speak on things, because that's what's told to them.
I want to go back, Megan, to what you mentioned with the sexism that the WNBA faces. Is there something above that stands out in your mind first when you're going into the way that broadcasters, whether they describe the WNBA, when they talk about the WNBA, what really jumps out to you?
Probably the biggest thing is saying women or girls or ladies. I do it myself, and I cover the league. It's something I'm trying to work on eliminating from my vocabulary when speaking about them. They're athletes. They're basketball players. Yes, they are women. In certain instances, I'll refer to them as women because they are powerful. You have them down in a bubble, or as they're calling it, the wubble. And shout out Mo Curry for coming up with that one. And a lot of them are moms, and they are doing 2 jobs right now. But that's something they do all season long, because a lot of them will take their children with them overseas as well too. So it's so interesting that, people are seeing the reactions of the NBA players to being in the NBA campus at Disney and having to adjust to that. WNBA players, this is normal to them. They are secluded overseas when they're in Italy, Russia, Greece, Romania, Slovenia. This is normal. But I think the biggest thing for me that I notice is just calling them athletes, not female athletes. It's, you know, it goes back to what Serena said when she, when people talk about her being the most dominant female athlete in tennis or just period. Like why do we need to describe her that way? She's an athlete. She's an athlete just like Roger Federer, just like, you know, just like LeBron James, just like Tiger Woods. She's an athlete. She is a dominant athlete. And I think it even goes into talking about ourselves. You know, I don't want to I mean, Jesse, you did it, so I think I feel like I could do it too. I made history as the first female play-by-play broadcaster in the NBA G League and the first in 30 years to call an NBA game. I don't like that people refer to me as a female broadcaster. I'm just a broadcaster. I do play-by-play. I don't know why my gender dictates my title. And it should be the same for athletes as well.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I totally agree. I became more aware of the women versus girls kind of approach to especially college basketball when I was the last couple of years with them, and thinking, okay, well, you call it the men's team consistently, but why are they never the boys? Yes, they're 18, 19 years old, but you know, they're women. They are hardworking student athletes who deserve that respect. And as the female broadcaster too, I mean, I was only the second in minor league baseball, and it's always a news story that kind of follows us. And I'm honestly so over being that news story. I just want to walk into a press box and people are like, oh yeah, okay, you are the voice, not, oh my gosh, you're a female, you know, you're a girl. Like it's one of those things where it's just that constant kind of cloud over your shoulder that follows you wherever you go, just because you're a little bit different.
And yeah, to build on that, I think it even goes beyond just the athlete. And as you started to mention, it's how we treat women in sports generally is just terrible and awful. Like that, it's one of the things that came out from, you know, the Washington story. And how many organizations could you have pointed to throughout your times going through the sports world and come up with your own examples of, not from the Washington NFL team, but from your minor league baseball team or your hockey team or the college program that you're at, where the office has comments that make women feel uncomfortable or have, you know, different conversations that they think are off to the side or they're not being heard by the different women who are around the office. And, you know, sports just needs to become a more inclusive place for women around the game, not just in the game itself. So I think it's a much larger scale problem, and it goes like to leadership. And as you've mentioned, like, you know, Daniel Snyder is the owner of the Washington NFL team, and he didn't clearly set a tone that had accountability towards the mistreatment of women throughout the office. But then again, it's hard to have that same kind of, you know, that hardline tone when the WHO, as Meghan so eloquently put it, the person in charge in the White House, like, you know, one of the things that he had around election time was a quote, grab him by the P word. And that was something that in a way didn't hurt him, maybe even helped him gather support somehow and turn it into a narrative of we're too sensitive towards things and it's quote unquote locker room talk. He tied it to sports by saying it's locker room talk, that it's as common for people around sports to discuss women that way. So like the whole thing is problematic, and it starts again, at the top. But one of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to within this chat is to learn how can somebody like me help that and be a better ally to make sure that this stuff happens a lot less than it does now.
I will even say too, it sometimes starts in the job interviews. The number of times that I've been in interviews that, you know, things were said to me that my male counterparts who were interviewing for the same job, things were not said, whether it was, you know, in regards to traveling with the team or the living situation for the broadcaster, but how if I was hired, that would be different because of my gender and things like that. So I think as someone who would be a minority going into those positions, that's an immediate turnoff for the organization as a whole, not to mention sports as a whole. Why would you want to go into a profession that's kind of your introduction and you're interviewing for what's possibly your dream job, but that's what meets you at the door. So I think that it's that leadership, like you mentioned, but has to be some accountability to, if that was to happen, that person can speak out without being labeled as the outspoken one, and then their career is over before it even begins.
What I've seen too, and this has been for years and years and years, people internalize it because you get told that's what comes with the territory. This is just how it is. We're just seeing how tough you are. You've got to learn to take a joke. All those little micro jabs, and it gets internalized to the point where, similar to, let's say, you don't make any money, and now people at the upper levels, people who've been in it for years, are saying, well, I had to deal with this, so therefore I don't see why you're complaining about dealing with this. But it's not you personally, it's them. And so, Chris, to get back to the Washington football team, it's the culture, and it goes right to the top. And it is these specific people who need to resign. And it is the attention that needs to get paid to what's a problem and what can't be said.
Yeah, and I do take a lot from what Emma just said, and like the position that it puts women into, if they call it out, then they're labeled the outspoken one, and now it's hard for you to get a job or feel like you're marketable to other organizations because you were the one who is known for calling out the mistreatment that goes on. So now you're, quote, I guess, scary to bring into their building because you could expose what goes on there. So accountability is the number one thing. And it's like, you have to approach it from a position of stop being scared of being exposed and actually start to have a genuine interest of being inclusive, because again, it only helps the organization, right? The more difference of thought that you have, the more different perspectives you have in there, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's background, economic status, et cetera, the more you have of different backgrounds within your organization, the better ideas that you have. And like, from all of sports, what you want from the performance level to the marketing level to anything is different ideas than what everybody else has, because that's what differentiates you from everything else. And you want to differentiate yourself as an organization. So it kind of goes back from, how are these people who are at the top approaching it? Are you approaching it from a scared position, or are you approaching it as an opportunity?
And Chris, I think what's so important is what you just said, mentioning the fact that you have so many different voices coming in. What people seem to forget is that when you have things like racism, sexism that exist in a company, and of course in a sports team as well, in thought leadership, you're only hurting yourself. You're losing a potential brilliant mind that you could have in there, but because you want to be too racist, because you want to be too sexist, because you have an old boys club, you just want to keep it the way it is, rather than being diverse in your thinking, rather than being challenged on a daily basis, rather than having a tough conversation, you're only hurting yourself. And that's, I think, the grand irony in all of this is the fact that if you do open yourself up to being in a position where, all right, I can get called out on my implicit bias, that's fine, it's only going to make the company and make you stronger. And I think people kind of forget that at times.
Yeah,
how much is this?
think
I was going to mention, how much is this coming from the people who are getting to get into the door in the first place? Because again, it goes to the fact that, you know, the entry level positions for this, we know how little it pays. We know how unstable it is. So you're not necessarily going to get anybody who doesn't have that secure financial backing. And history will tell us from the different reasons that we've had that it's typically, you know, the upper class white, like, you know, the demographics that make that up. So, and if those are the people who continue to be in the industry and probably at the top of it, because even this new initiative that people have with the higher awareness of who's in it, the people who are still at the top of these organizations fit that background of, you know, never really having to concern themselves with these ideas. So how much of that comes from who is actually getting into the door and who's at the top of the industry in these different hiring positions?
I think a big thing too is allyship. Like, if there's a situation, like, let's hypothetically say we all work in an organization, in the same team, in the same office, and, you know, you guys all notice that Emma and I get microaggression comments. It's one thing for us to stand up for ourselves and say something, but it also takes our male counterparts and our male colleagues to not accept it as well. Because at the end of the day, you know, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's microaggression because of race, whatever it may be, if it is directed to myself or Emma because we're women, we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to say something. But if you notice it as men and you're just as, you don't say anything and you're quiet, in my opinion, you're just as complicit as the person saying it. It's like bullying. If you're standing there and watching a kid get beat up and bullied and you're not going to step in and do anything, or maybe you might not step in, but if you don't say something to the teacher or to the principal and have that kid's back that's getting bullied, you're just as complicit and just as wrong as the bully. And I think when it comes to sexism in the workplace and racial disparities in the workplace, it's just as important too for men to have women's backs and be allies, and white people to have Black people and other minorities backs. Because at the end of the day, when you look at, like, for example, you look at the, you know, the pay inequity, women are paid 67 cents to the dollar of male, but that's white women. Black women and Latino women are paid even less than the 67 cents. So we can have our back as women, but we also need our male counterparts and colleagues to also be our allies and lift us up as well. Because if it, like, to Darius's point, if it's an old boys club, it doesn't change if men aren't having the, you know, they're not putting their foot down and being like enough is enough. It's, you know, we're saying enough is enough when it comes to race, but we also have to say enough is enough when it comes to the treatment of women in whatever type of workplace, whether it's, because let's be real, it does not just happen in sports. It happens in finance, it happens in law, it happens in the medical field, it happens everywhere. And we just need to have the allyship. I think that's a big factor in changing the thought process of people. And to Darius's point and Emma's point, having, and Chris's point, having more voices in the conversations and in the conference rooms, because at the end of the day, all we want is a seat at the table. Because once I get that seat, please believe my voice is going to be heard, whether you like it or not.
Well, I mean, just to kind of speak to that allyship, you know, it's easy to write off one person that has a bad experience, but if you have multiple voices standing up to that, as you said, you know, bully or whatever that example would be, you know, it's easy to say, oh, a woman, they're just being emotional, or, you know, you can say any type of stereotype you want to whenever it comes to a woman trying to speak out about her one experience, but to have that kind of someone just looking after you and that has your back, you know, I think that just kind of speaks further to maybe building that organization from within and having those tough conversations and making sure that, you know, these people are not alone.
I would rather believe someone who is wrong once than to not believe someone who is telling the truth 1,000 times over. Because you can apologize for being wrong. If I misunderstand a comment, I can apologize for misunderstanding it. But if I didn't misunderstand it and no one believes me, and that keeps happening, I'm okay with that one wrong time.
Yeah, and I know from one conversation that I had with a woman who was in one of the organizations that I used to work with, and she had mentioned the different times that she's been mistreated in the workplace. And one of the things that it just comes down to is like the conversation of the boss saying, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. And how do you get past that power dynamic of there's a bunch of people that are out there willing to do that job, and like there's the waiting list for somebody who wants to be somebody in marketing or in broadcasting or whatever job it is in sports is just so long that there really isn't any incentive for the person who's in charge to really tailor their behavior or make it more acceptable within the workplace, because they could just get somebody else and that's how they feel.
There's also, if you leave, that's the right thing to do, right? You're standing by your morals. And then they're going to bring in the next person. Then they're going to bring in the next person. So they stay the same. This is important to confront. And it is, as you said, Megan, the whole idea of being an ally. Chris, as you asked before, how can you be that? Just having your ears open. There are people who are, and I'm going to say willfully ignorant, because they say, I'm going to cover the team, or I'm going to do this job and I'm not going to care about anything else. So head is down, blinders are on, and they they go about their job and they don't see anywhere where they could just step in because they've got a good heart and they're looking themselves in the mirror and telling themselves that they're the hero. And yet they're just walking along their path and not leaving their path to assist anybody else. All right, well, that's about sexism, by and large. There's racism in the workplace too. I mean, I don't want to put it out as bluntly as this, but has anyone been microaggressed in the workplace on race?
I mean, yeah, I think we could, if you really wanted to break it down, we could be here all night going through just the microaggressions, because honestly, that's where it's going to be more often than not, because, hey, going off and saying the N-word, we all know that's bad. But going and just saying, hey, pretty articulate for, oh, you're pretty smart. You are so well spoken. Wow, that was really impressive what you did. I just did my job. Like there are so many different things where people just look at you, and it's not even necessarily along the lines of race. It can be based off gender as well, where it's just the expectation is so low for you going in, and you can feel it when someone has a low expectation for you. So when you just do something very minimal and you blow them away by it, it's such an insult to who you are and what you do. So it's one of those things where I think we could spend a lot of time going through specific examples, but just kind of like, I think those microaggressions is kind of where it lives for most people on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of build on top of that, I've heard that, the very articulate, the, very well spoken. You've all heard that. I think it's interesting when you're in a position of, like in Boise, Idaho, for example. I can speak to my own experience here of it's not exactly the most diverse state, right? Like less than 1% Black in Idaho. So you almost feel like you're speaking for more than yourself, and that becomes difficult at times too when like you're the city's Black friend. Like that's a weird position to be in a lot of the times, and you sort of get used to being able to handle that position, but that's something that you never really feel completely adjusted to, and it's something that you're in a way constantly reminded of whenever a topic that regards race does come up, or whether it doesn't, and you're just looking around and you're at a rodeo and you're like, wait a minute, yeah, why do I look different than everybody else here at this rodeo? And of course, I had never been to a rodeo before. So like you all have your own experiences there. But like in general, I like to believe that, a good majority of the people individually, especially here in Boise, have treated me well. But you do get reminded in some instances of how different that you actually are. And again, that responsibility of being that Black friend is something that kind of does weigh on me sometimes.
On that note, we can conclude this conversation. Thank you to everybody for all of your thoughts. Megan, Emma, Chris, Darius, any final thoughts?
No, I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. And I know we might do this again. You were saying how we can reconvene and continue the discussion. I love that. And it's great that I do think that people seem to be taking this a lot more seriously than they were. Like it was, let's be real, like 4 years ago around November, it was kind of a discouraging time for a lot of these type of conversations. You didn't think that it would be something that we would really be willing to address, but we've come pretty far in such a short amount of time that I am more encouraged than maybe I was a few years ago.
And I do want to sneak in just really quick with one thing that I really hope that we do going forward, not just us, but everyone as broadcasters. Please don't be lazy with your vernacular. Please don't refer to a type of athlete. Don't typecast athletes. Don't just look at, well, this is a big guy, so this is what he must be. Or, oh, this is this person, that is who they are. Please do your research, know your athletes. Please. That's one conversation we probably need to get into next time.
We'll get into that. Thank you, everyone.